The crowded gym fell silent the moment she stepped in. Jeans, old sneakers, no fancy gear. The coach sneered, mocking her before she even threw a punch. But one jab, perfectly timed and fierce, sent him crashing to the floor. Welcome to Dignity Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The old gym smelled of sweat, leather, and determination. The clang of heavy bags, the sharp thuds of gloves hitting pads, and a low murmur of focused boxers filled the air. I walked through the door in worn jeans and a faded sweatshirt, my hands bare except for a small pair of wraps I'd bought the day before. The noise dimmed for a moment, and I could feel dozens of eyes on me. I didn't belong here. At least, that's what the coach's smirk said. Big and broad-shouldered, with a voice that could command silence or laughter, he was the kind of man who believed boxing was for the fit, the flashy, the confident. Not for someone like me, someone who just wanted to learn how to throw a punch. "Hey, this isn't a charity," he said loud enough for the room to hear, pointing at my old sneakers. "You think you can keep up here looking like that?" The other boxers chuckled, some shaking their heads, some barely hiding smirks. I swallowed the lump in my throat, but didn't look away. I'd spent too long hiding, too long feeling small. This was my chance to change that. I signed in, paid my fee, and wrapped my hands as best as I could. The coach paced in front of the group and barked orders, his eyes flicking toward me every now and then with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. As the warm-ups began, I struggled. My lungs burned. My feet stumbled. But I kept moving. Every jab, every hook, every step was a tiny victory. Nobody believed I belonged here, but I was ready to prove them wrong. The boxing gym buzzed with the usual energy, but for me, it felt like an arena. Every glance from the other fighters was a silent verdict. Outsider, unworthy, a joke. The coach's smirk only deepened as he watched me fumble through the footwork drills. "You call that a jab?" he barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. More like a weak slap. Laughter erupted from the group, sharp and unrelenting. The echo of their amusement dug into my skin like 1,000 needles. I forced a tight smile and kept my guard up, refusing to let their mockery steal my focus. Some of the younger fighters whispered behind their gloves, mimicking my stance and poking fun at my untrained movements. "Maybe she's just here to watch," one whispered, loud enough for me to catch. Another laughed and said, "Yeah, someone get the mop. Looks like she's going to cry." I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, but refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I squared my shoulders and breathed deeply, reminding myself why I was here. This wasn't about impressing the coach or the other fighters. It was about proving to myself that I could step into this ring, this world, and hold my own. I'd faced harder battles before. This was just a different kind of fight. The coach clapped his hands and barked, "All right, enough horsing around. Let's see if you can even last through a sparring session without getting knocked out." His eyes locked on me. "You ready for that?" I nodded, steady despite the pounding of my heart. The gym might laugh, but I was here to stay. That night, my mind replayed every mocking word and sneer from the gym. I could have let it break me, but something inside stirred, a quiet fire that refused to die. I wasn't just here to take punches. I was here to learn how to throw them back. Hard. The next morning, I woke early, hands aching from the wraps, but spirit stronger than ever. I watched boxing videos online, studied the stances, the footwork, the rhythm of a well-timed jab. I wasn't a natural athlete, but I was stubborn, and sometimes that counts for more. I told myself this wasn't about anyone else's approval. It was about carving a space for myself where I could be strong, physically and mentally. Every jab I threw, even if clumsy, was a declaration. I belong here. At the gym that evening, the coach barely hid his disdain when I entered. "Back for more humiliation?" he sneered. But I didn't respond. I simply laced up my gloves and stepped into the ring. The other boxers glanced my way, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. The whispered jokes still floated around me, but I learned to tune them out, focusing instead on the sound of my breathing and the feel of the gloves against my fists. During drills, I stumbled, missed punches, and took hits I wasn't ready for. But I kept moving. Each mistake was a lesson. Each bruise a badge of progress. The gym was no longer a place of judgment. It was a battlefield, and I was determined to fight for my place. The following days were a whirlwind of sweat, sore muscles, and awkward mistakes. Every session at the gym was a challenge, learning to move my feet without stumbling, to keep my guard up, and to throw punches with purpose. I wasn't graceful. I wasn't fast, but I was there. The coach rarely offered praise. Mostly, it was grunts of impatience or sharp critiques. "Keep your hands up. Watch your chin," he'd shout, voice echoing off the walls. At times, I wondered if he even believed I could improve. The other boxers remained distant. Some warmed up with partners, sharing laughs and practice moves. I was mostly left to myself, practicing shadowboxing in a corner, imagining the jab that would someday change everything. After one brutal session, my arms trembling and sweat soaking my clothes, a younger boxer named Lisa approached me. She was small but fierce, with quick hands and a ready smile. "You're sticking with it," she said, nodding toward my exhausted frame. "Most people bail after a week." I smiled back, grateful for the small kindness. "I'm not most people," I said quietly. Lisa offered to spar with me during the next class. It was nerve-wracking, but I accepted. Her movements were sharp, practiced, everything I wanted to be. Our session was short, but it showed me I could learn if I just kept trying. That night, as I lay in bed, muscles aching and heart pounding, I felt something shift. The journey was just beginning, and for the first time, I believed I might actually make it. The days stretched on, each training session pushing me harder than the last. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt, and my muscles protested every early morning wake-up. The coach's criticism never softened. Sometimes it felt like a storm crashing over me. One afternoon, after a particularly rough sparring session where I barely managed to keep my guard up, doubt crept in like an unwelcome shadow. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe the coach was right. Maybe I didn't belong in the boxing gym at all. That night, alone in my small apartment, I stared at my gloves on the table. I thought about quitting, just walking away from the punches, the sneers, the endless feeling of not being enough. But then I remembered why I started. Not for them, not for the coach, but for me. I wanted to be stronger, not just in body, but in spirit, to fight for myself in a way I never had before. The next morning, I laced up my gloves with renewed resolve. I might stumble, I might fall, but I wasn't going to give up. The coach's words still echoed, but they no longer held power over me. I was learning to trust my own strength, and that made all the difference. The days stretched on, each training session pushing me harder than the last. My muscles ached in places I didn't even know could hurt, the sting of bruises blooming across my ribs, the relentless throb behind my knees, the dull burn in my shoulders. Every movement reminded me that this was no gentle hobby. Boxing demanded everything. The coach's voice was a constant presence, sharp and unyielding. "Keep your guard up. Don't drop your hands," he barked, frustration dripping from every word. There was no praise, no encouragement, only criticism that echoed through the gym and settled deep in my chest. One afternoon, after a grueling sparring session where I barely managed to keep my guard intact, a heavy wave of doubt crashed over me. My legs felt like lead, my arms barely obeyed. I remembered the coach's sneering words, the laughter from the others, the way their eyes seemed to say I didn't belong. That night, alone in my tiny apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my worn gloves resting on the table. The thought of quitting circled my mind like a dark cloud. I could walk away, no more pain, no more mockery, no more feeling like an outsider trying to squeeze into a world that wasn't made for me. But then I thought about why I started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for the approval of the coach or the other fighters. It wasn't about proving anyone else wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could be stronger, braver, more than the quiet person I'd been for so long. I wanted to fight, not just in the ring, but in life. To stand taller and own my story, no matter what anyone else thought. The next morning, I pulled on my gloves with a quiet determination. The ache in my muscles was still there, but so was the fire inside me. The coach's harsh words no longer held the power they once did. I was learning to trust my own strength, and that made all the difference. The gym was still buzzing with energy when Lisa approached me after class. I was exhausted, sweat dripping down my face, hands trembling from hours of pounding the heavy bag. I barely noticed her at first. I was lost in my thoughts, replaying every jab, every misstep. "You're really sticking with this," she said, her voice warm but direct. She wiped her hands on her shorts and smiled. "Most people quit after a week. You're different." I looked up, surprised. Lisa was smaller than most of the fighters, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. She wasn't someone who would waste words on empty praise. "Thanks," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's not easy." She nodded knowingly. "It's supposed to be hard. If it were easy, everyone would do it." For the first time since I'd walked into the gym, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone here. "Hey, I'm Lisa," she said, extending her hand. "If you want, I can spar with you next class. Help you get the feel for it." Sparring. The word sent a jolt through me. I'd seen it before. Fighters trading punches, sweat flying, bodies moving with practice grace. I'd only dared to watch from the sidelines, never imagining I'd be in the ring. But Lisa's offer was genuine, without judgment. It was the first crack in the wall I'd built around myself. "I'd like that," I said quietly. Over the next week, I found myself looking forward to class more than ever. When Lisa and I sparred, she was patient, encouraging, and tough. She corrected my form gently but firmly, pushing me just enough to improve without overwhelming me. With each session, my confidence grew. I was no longer just the awkward newcomer. I was a fighter in training. The coach noticed too. His cold glances became fewer, his critiques less harsh. Lisa's friendship was a lifeline, proof that even in the hardest battles, unexpected allies could appear. The days blurred together as I threw myself into training with a new intensity. Every evening after work, I made my way to the gym, determined to chip away at my weaknesses and build something stronger. My body ached, muscles burning with every jab, every uppercut, every step around the ring. But each ache was proof that I was pushing beyond my limits. Lisa was my anchor during those grueling sessions. She was relentless, but fair, guiding me through footwork drills, correcting my stance, and sparring until sweat drenched our clothes. Her encouragement never faltered, even when I stumbled or lost my rhythm. I learned to breathe through the pain, to listen to the rhythm of my own heartbeat, to find a space between punches where I could strike with precision. The coach still watched, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, but I sensed his curiosity growing beneath his tough exterior. Outside the gym, I worked on my own, running early mornings to build endurance, shadowboxing in front of the mirror, replaying videos of boxing legends to study their moves. I recorded myself, scrutinizing every detail, every mistake, learning not just how to fight others, but how to fight my own doubts. The bruises and scrapes became badges of progress, stories etched on my skin. I wasn't fast or graceful yet, but I was persistent, and persistence was a kind of power all its own. Each week, the gym felt a little less intimidating, the laughter a little less biting. I began to see faces I hadn't noticed before. Nods of respect, subtle acknowledgments from those who had once dismissed me. The biggest change, though, was inside me. I wasn't just learning to box. I was learning to trust myself, to face challenges head-on, and to believe that strength wasn't about how you looked, but about how you refused to give up. One evening, after an especially tough session, the coach finally nodded as I caught my breath. "You're getting better," he said, voice low but genuine. It wasn't praise, but it was something. I smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. Despite the small nod of approval, the coach's arrogance remained as thick as ever. He ruled the gym like a king, his sharp eyes scanning every move we made, always ready to criticize. I could see the way he looked at me, not as a student, but as an inconvenience, a mistake that needed correction or dismissal. "Boxing isn't for dreamers," he said one afternoon, pacing in front of the group with his usual commanding presence. "It's for fighters who are willing to bleed, to sweat, to break themselves, and get back up." His gaze settled on me, a challenge wrapped in disdain. The other boxers nodded, some smirking, some shifting uncomfortably. The coach's words weren't just about physical toughness. They were about his belief that only those who fit a certain mold belonged here. And I wasn't that mold. When we drilled combinations, he was quick to point out every mistake. Left hook tighter. Don't drop your shoulder. What's wrong with you? His voice was harsh, slicing through the air like a whip. Sometimes I wanted to snap back, to tell him he had no right to judge me when he barely knew my story. But I stayed silent. I knew this was part of the battle. His arrogance was a wall I had to break down, not with words but with actions. Every punch I threw was a silent rebuttal to his sneers. One day, during a particularly intense session, the coach called me out in front of everyone. "You're wasting my time," he snapped. "Maybe boxing isn't for you." The gym fell quiet. The sting of his words burned, but instead of breaking, something inside me hardened. I lifted my chin and met his eyes. "Maybe you're wrong," I said quietly, but with steady conviction. The room was still. For the first time, the coach's arrogance faltered just a flicker. The fight wasn't just in the ring anymore. It was for respect, for belonging. And I was ready to win. The gym was tense that day, the air thick with sweat and expectation. I've been pushing myself harder than ever, desperate to prove I belonged. Not just to the coach, but to everyone watching. I knew the drill. Every session was a test, every jab a measure of my worth. As we lined up for technique review, the coach's eyes locked on me. His expression was colder than usual, lips pressed tight like he was holding back a storm. "Step forward," he barked. I obeyed, heart hammering but hands steady. He circled me like a hawk, watching every movement, every stance, every breath. The other boxers fell silent, sensing something was about to happen. Then came the critique, sharp, public, and brutal. "Your footwork is sloppy," he said, voice cutting through the silence. "You're slow to react, and your punches lack power. You're not just holding the group back, you're embarrassing yourself." The words hit me like a blow to the ribs, knocking the breath out of me. I could feel the eyes of the others on me, some shocked, some amused, some pitying. It would have been easy to crumble, to let the humiliation swallow me whole. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to hold my ground. This wasn't the first time I'd been told I wasn't good enough, and it wouldn't be the last. I knew the coach's words were meant to hurt, to shake my confidence, maybe even make me quit. Instead, they ignited something deeper, a fire that refused to be extinguished by harsh words or sneers. I had come too far to let one critique define me. "I'll get better," I said quietly, but with unwavering resolve. "Watch me." The coach's gaze lingered for a moment, unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharply. "Good," he said, "because you'll need it." As I returned to my spot, the gym's energy shifted. It wasn't respect yet, but the battle lines were drawn. I was no longer just a simple woman they laughed at. I was a fighter with something to prove. After the coach's harsh critique, the gym felt different, more intense, charged with something I couldn't quite name. The whispers had quieted, the laughter faded into cautious glances. I wasn't just the awkward newcomer anymore. I was a challenge, a question that demanded an answer. I didn't respond with words. I didn't have to. My silence was louder than any shout. It spoke of determination, of a promise to myself that I wouldn't be broken or deterred. Each day, I showed up early, laced my gloves tighter, and stayed late, practicing alone when the gym emptied. The sounds of my punches hitting the bag echoed through the quiet space like a heartbeat, steady, relentless. The bruises and cuts remained, but they were badges now, symbols of progress and pain endured. My muscles ached, but beneath the soreness was a growing strength that surprised even me. I focused on the basics: footwork, breathing, timing. I repeated drills until my body remembered what my mind still struggled to grasp. When the coach barked corrections, I didn't flinch or argue. I absorbed it, letting each word sharpen my focus rather than dull my spirit. There were moments, late at night, when doubt crept in, quiet and insidious. But those were the moments I reminded myself why I started. Not for approval, not for glory, but for the quiet victory of proving to myself that I could endure. In the ring, I found a strange kind of peace, a place where the noise of judgment faded, replaced by the rhythm of movement and the clarity of purpose. Every jab, every duck, every pivot was a step towards something bigger than the gym, something inside me waiting to be born. One afternoon, as I caught my breath after a long session, the coach's gaze lingered a little longer than usual. There was no smile, no praise, but a flicker of respect, barely visible but unmistakable. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The day of my first sparring session arrived with a mix of nerves and quiet determination. Sparring was where theory met reality, where the gloves came off and the true test began. The coach called me forward, his usual stern expression softened just enough to suggest this was serious. I stepped into the ring, heart pounding like a drum. Across from me stood a fellow boxer, stronger and more experienced, her eyes sharp and focused. She nodded briefly, a silent signal that this was about the sport, not the judgment. The bell rang, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I moved tentatively at first, tried to remember everything I'd learned, how to keep my guard up, how to move my feet, how to find the opening for a jab. Her punches came fast, precise, but I managed to block and dodge more than I expected. Each time I slipped a hit or landed a punch, a spark of confidence flared inside me. The coach paced the side of the ring, shouting advice, but mostly watching, waiting to see how I'd handle the pressure. The rounds passed, sweat pouring down my face, muscles screaming for relief, but I stayed present, focused. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to learn, to prove to myself that I could stand toe-to-toe with someone who'd been fighting for years. When the bell finally rang for the last time, I was breathing hard, arms heavy, but my spirit was light. The coach approached, eyes narrowed, but there was no sneer today, only a nod. "You held your own," he said gruffly. "Not bad." The other fighters clapped, some with surprise, others with genuine respect. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with winning. It was the pride of showing up, of fighting through fear and refusing to back down. That sparring session didn't just teach me about boxing, it taught me about resilience, about the power of facing challenges head-on and growing stronger because of them. After that sparring session, something inside me shifted. The gym, once a place of doubt and ridicule, began to feel like a proving ground, a place where I could rewrite my story. I no longer saw the coach's critiques as attacks, but as challenges to meet and overcome. I spent hours replaying that sparring match in my mind, analyzing each move, each miss, each hit I took without falling. I realized I wasn't just fighting my opponent. I was fighting the voice inside that told me I wasn't good enough. One evening, after the gym had emptied, I stayed behind a practice. The heavy bag swung rhythmically in the dim light, and I threw punches with a growing confidence, my movements sharper, more deliberate. I was no longer just a beginner stumbling through the basics. I was becoming a boxer. The coach walked in silently, watching me without a word. For the first time, I felt less like an outsider and more like someone being measured, assessed not for what I lacked, but for what I was becoming. He nodded briefly, a small gesture that felt like a breakthrough. That night, I went home with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer fighting just to survive the gym. I was fighting to prove to myself that I could rise. The days that followed were filled with hard work and small victories. My footwork improved. My punches landed with more accuracy. My stamina grew. More importantly, my confidence blossomed. I held my head higher, my steps firmer. The coach's tone began to change, too. His commands became less harsh, his corrections more precise. I could see a flicker of respect in his eyes, though he'd never say it aloud. The other fighters started to nod in acknowledgement when I passed. The whispers of doubt faded, replaced by quiet recognition. That moment, the turning point, wasn't marked by a single punch or a dramatic victory. It was quieter, more subtle. It was the moment I stopped seeing myself as the woman who didn't belong and started seeing the fighter I was becoming. Late nights became my secret weapon. After the gym closed and the echoes of punches faded, I stayed behind, alone with the shadows and the hum of the city outside. The heavy bag swung gently in the dim light, waiting for me to pour everything I had into it. These private sessions were different. No judgment, no sneers, just the steady rhythm of my fist connecting with leather. I worked on the details the coach rarely had time to address. Tightening my guard, perfecting my footwork, learning to breathe through the sting of every strike. I recorded myself with my phone, watching the playback with a critical eye. Each mistake was a lesson, each awkward movement a chance to improve. I traced the lines of my punches, adjusted my stance, and repeated drills until muscle memory began to take hold. Sometimes, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. My body begged for rest, but my mind pushed forward, fueled by a growing determination I hadn't felt before. The pain became a familiar companion, a sign that I was breaking through my limits. I kept my training secret from everyone except Lisa. She was my sounding board, my encourager. When we met at the gym, she noticed the difference immediately. "You're getting sharper," she said with a smile. "What's your secret?" I just smiled back, knowing that this part of my journey was mine alone. The gym was a battlefield during the day, but these late-night sessions were where I found my strength, not just in my fists, but in my will. The coach still watched, sometimes with a raised eyebrow, sometimes with a subtle nod. His arrogance hadn't vanished, but it softened ever so slightly, replaced by a grudging respect. With every secret session, I grew more confident. The woman who had walked into the gym months ago, unsure and untrained, was becoming someone else, someone capable, fierce, and ready to face whatever came next. With every passing day, I felt the slow but steady rise of something I hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. It started as a faint whisper inside me, growing louder with each training session, each successful combination, and every moment I stood my ground. Lisa noticed it first. "You're different," she said one afternoon as we wrapped our hand before class. "You move with purpose now, not hesitation." Her words felt like a balm to my weary spirit. The coach, too, began to change how he treated me. His critiques remained sharp, but the tone had shifted from derision to something more measured, almost like respect, though he'd never admit it aloud. I found myself looking forward to class instead of dreading it. The gym, once a place filled with judgment and laughter behind my back, was becoming a space where I could grow, where my hard work mattered more than how I looked or where I came from. Sparring sessions became less terrifying and more exhilarating. I learned to anticipate my opponent's moves, to read the rhythm of the fight instead of reacting blindly. When I landed a solid punch, a spark of pride ignited deep inside me. One day, after a particularly intense session, the coach called me over. His usual stern face was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "You're improving. Keep it up." It was the first time he'd said anything remotely encouraging, and it stuck with me. That small acknowledgement became a fuel, pushing me harder than ever. Outside the gym, I started to notice changes too. I held myself differently, shoulders back, head high. I walked with a steadier step, a quiet assurance that I belonged, not just in the gym, but in my own life. The whispers and laughter didn't disappear overnight, but they lost their power. I was no longer just the simple woman they once dismissed. I was a fighter. And with that fight came a growing belief that I could face whatever challenges life threw at me, in the ring and beyond. The day the coach issued his challenge, the gym buzzed with anticipation. I'd been making steady progress, and everyone could see it, even the coach, whose sharp eyes now held a grudging respect. But when he called me out in front of the entire class, I felt a familiar nervous flutter in my chest. "All right," he said, voice booming over the hum of conversation. "If you think you've got what it takes, prove it. You and me, one round. Let's see what you're really made of." The room went silent. The other boxers exchanged glances, some skeptical, others eager to see if I could actually stand my ground. My heart raced, but I refused to back down. This was the moment I'd been training for, the chance to show that I wasn't just a beginner stumbling through the motions, but a fighter with grit and determination. We stepped into the ring, the crowd parting to give us space. The coach's usual arrogance was tempered by a serious edge. This wasn't a joke to him. The bell rang, and the dance began. His punches came fast and precise, but I kept my guard tight, slipping and weaving with growing confidence. Every jab I landed was a declaration. I belonged here. The gym echoed with the sounds of gloves meeting flesh and leather, the rhythm of a battle fought not just with fists, but with willpower. I wasn't trying to win, at least not yet, but I was proving something far more important. I was not to be underestimated. The coach's face tightened as I countered his blows, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. The gym watched in stunned silence, the usual chatter replaced by tense focus. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the round, we stepped back, both breathing hard. The coach nodded slowly, a rare look of approval in his eyes. "You've got heart," he said gruffly. "Keep working. You might actually make a fighter out of you yet." The challenge had become a turning point, a powerful reminder that respect was earned, not given. After the coach's challenge, the gym felt different. The quiet nod of approval was still fresh in my mind, and with it came a new kind of pressure, the pressure to prove that I wasn't just a flash in the pan, but someone serious about boxing. I threw myself into preparation with everything I had. Every evening was a whirlwind of sweat and repetition. I arrived early, lacing my gloves with purpose, and stayed late, pushing through exhaustion to sharpen every movement. The coach's critiques became my blueprint. "Keep your guard up," he reminded. "Watch your angles." I repeated these mantras in my head as I practiced punches and footwork, drilling them until they became second nature. I focused on conditioning, too. Early morning runs stretched my lungs and legs beyond their limits. I learned to pace myself, to keep going when my body screamed for rest. It was more than physical training, it was mental. I was training my mind to stay sharp, focused, and unyielding. Lisa remained my steadfast ally, offering tips and encouragement. Sometimes, she pushed me harder than the coach did, but always with kindness. "You've got this," she'd say, her eyes bright with belief. The whispers and sideways glances from others in the gym had softened, replaced by curious observation. I caught glimpses of respect in the eyes of those who had once doubted me, but I didn't let it get to my head. Preparation was about more than impressing others. It was about building my own confidence and readiness for the challenge ahead. As the day of the big fight drew near, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. The nervousness hadn't disappeared, but it was tempered by something new: readiness. I was ready to face the coach in the ring, not just as the woman who walked in months ago, but as a fighter with skill, heart, and determination. The gym buzzed like never before. Word had spread about the upcoming showdown, me versus the coach. Fighters, regulars, even a few curious newcomers gathered, filling the space with a mix of excitement and tension. The air was thick with anticipation, the usual sounds replaced by murmurs and whispered bets. I stood in the locker room, heart pounding beneath my gloves, hands steady despite the adrenaline. Months of sweat, pain, and determination had led to this moment. I wasn't the timid newcomer anymore. I was ready. Lisa found me there, her smile steady and reassuring. "You've got this," she said softly. "Just remember everything you've learned." The coach entered the ring first, his usual commanding presence softened by a flicker of respect. He glanced my way with a nod. No sneer this time, just acknowledgement. When I stepped into the ring, the crowd's chatter faded into a quiet hum. The bell rang, sharp and clear, and the fight began. His punches came fast and precise, each one a reminder of the skill and experience he carried. But I moved with purpose, slipping, ducking, countering with jabs that found their mark. Every hit was a statement. I belonged here. The rounds blurred together, sweat pouring down, muscles screaming, breath ragged but steady. The coach pressed harder, testing my limits, but I held firm, fueled by months of relentless training. Around us, the crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the unexpected battle unfolding. Whispers of disbelief replaced the usual derision. When the final bell rang, we stood in the center of the ring, chests heaving, eyes locked. The coach stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "You've earned your place here." A wave of pride and relief washed over me. This wasn't just a fight won by punches. It was a victory over doubt, judgment, and fear. The gym, once a place of ridicule, had become my proving ground, and I was ready for whatever came next. The bell rang sharply, slicing through the thick silence that had settled over the gym. My heart hammered in my chest as I took my stance, gloves raised, eyes locked on the coach. This was the moment where all the hours of sweat, pain, and perseverance collided into one intense burst of reality. He came at me fast, his fists a blur, testing my defense with quick jabs aimed to unsettle me. But I was ready. Every movement I made was deliberate, slipping his punches, weaving just enough to avoid the worst of the impact. I could feel the rhythm of the fight starting to settle between us. The coach's experience was clear. His strikes were precise, measured, and meant to push me off balance. But I remember my training, the late nights alone with a heavy bag, the mornings pounding the pavement to build stamina. I absorbed the pressure, pushing back with jabs of my own, each one a statement of growing confidence. My legs moved instinctively now, dancing around the ring, finding the space I needed to strike and defend. The crowd around us faded into background noise. Their gasps and whispers became insignificant compared to the pounding of my own heart and the steady breathing that kept me grounded. Every punch I threw carried the weight of months of determination. The nights when doubt crept in, the harsh words of the coach, the sneers of others who thought I didn't belong. This was my moment to prove them wrong. The coach's eyes flickered with surprise as I blocked a series of punches and landed a solid hook to his ribs. For a brief second, the sneer vanished, replaced by a flicker of respect. When the bell sounded to end the first round, we stepped back, both breathing hard, sweat pouring down our faces. I wiped a strand of hair from my eyes, feeling a rush of exhilaration and pride. I had made it through the first round. This fight wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about claiming my place one jab at a time. The gym was electric with tension as the second round began. The first had been a revelation, not just for me, but for everyone watching. I had held my own, even managed to land some solid punches. But the fight was far from over. The coach came at me harder this time, his moves faster, more aggressive. He was testing my limits, probing for weaknesses, trying to rattle my newfound confidence. But I refused to back down. I ducked under a powerful right hook and countered with a quick jab to his jaw. The sharp impact sent a ripple through the room. Even the coach's expression flickered with surprise. I could feel my adrenaline spike, the rush of battle sharpening every sense. My breath was heavy but steady, my muscles moving on instinct honed by weeks of relentless training. Around the ring, the usual sneers and whispers had vanished, replaced by quiet murmurs of awe and disbelief. The boxers who had once mocked me now watched with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. The coach's arrogance was still there, but beneath it was a grudging acknowledgement. He wasn't facing the timid woman who had first walked into the gym anymore. He was facing a fighter who had earned her place through sheer will and determination. I kept my guard tight, circling, looking for an opening. Each punch I threw was calculated. Not wild swings, but precise strikes aimed to wear him down. The rounds blurred into a fierce dance, a battle of wills as much as skill. I wasn't just fighting to win. I was fighting to prove to myself that I could face any challenge head-on and come out stronger. As sweat dripped into my eyes and muscles screamed for relief, I felt a deep surge of pride. This was no longer just a boxing match. It was the story of my transformation, one punch, one step, one moment at a time. The coach's defenses began to falter. The tide was turning. The fight had reached a fever pitch. Sweat dripped from my brow. My muscles burned with exhaustion, but my focus was sharper than ever. Every movement, every breath was honed to a single purpose, to land the jab that would change everything. The coach circled me, eyes narrowed, calculating his next move. He was a master of the ring, experienced and confident, but I had something he hadn't expected: relentless determination and months of unyielding training. As he lunged forward, throwing a heavy right hand, I saw my opening. Time slowed. My fist shot out, quick and precise, a clean jab aimed squarely at his jaw. The impact echoed through the gym like a thunderclap. The coach's head snapped back, his balance faltering. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, stunned by what had just happened. Then, as if time resumed, The coach stumbled and crashed to the mat, the gym erupting in gasps and whispers. I stood frozen for a moment, gloves raised, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. The disbelief in the room was palpable. The man who had mocked me, doubted me, dismissed me as unworthy was lying on the floor, sent there by a woman he thought was nothing more than a joke. The coach's eyes met mine, a flicker of respect breaking through the shock. No words were needed. The jab had spoken for me. As the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Relief, pride, vindication. Months of pain and perseverance had culminated in this one moment, a jab that wasn't just a punch, but a declaration. I belonged here. The gym, once a place of judgment and ridicule, had become the stage for my triumph. The fight wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about breaking down walls and rewriting stories. That jab changed everything. The gym fell into a stunned silence, the roar of punches and shouts replaced by a heavy, breathless stillness. The coach lay sprawled on the mat, his usual arrogance wiped away in an instant. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, the woman who had just landed the jab that no one thought possible. I stood there, gloves raised, heart pounding so fiercely I thought the walls might shake. For a moment, I felt weightless, as if I were suspended in time. The disbelief was tangible, a thick fog of shock that hung over the crowd like a heavy curtain. No one moved. The boxers who had once laughed at me now looked at me with something close to awe. Even the seasoned fighters seemed to reconsider everything they'd assumed about the girl in jeans and old sneakers. The coach slowly pushed himself up, his face flushed with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. His eyes met mine, and in that silent exchange, I saw a shift, a crack in the wall of disdain that had surrounded me since day one. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't fear or hostility. It was a moment of recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that I had proven myself in a way words never could. The crowd's silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the distant hum of the city beyond the gym walls. Slowly, hesitant claps began to ripple through the room, growing into a wave of applause that shook the old gym. I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that comes from deep inside, the pride of someone who has fought not just others but their own doubts and fears. This moment was more than a victory in the ring. It was a declaration that I belonged, that strength isn't about appearance or background, but about heart and perseverance. The silence had transformed into a powerful sound. Respect. The applause swelled, filling the gym with a sound that felt almost unfamiliar after months of quiet doubt and whispered judgments. The respect that had seemed so elusive was finally tangible, washing over me like a tide. For the first time, I felt seen, not as the awkward newcomer or the woman in worn clothes, but as a fighter who had earned her place. The coach, still catching his breath, wiped the sweat from his brow and stepped forward. His gaze was sharp, but no longer dismissive. "You've got heart," he said quietly, almost grudgingly, "and skill. You've earned this." Those words carried weight. More than just praise, they were a shift in the unspoken rules of the gym. I was no longer on the outside looking in. I belonged. Other fighters came over, offering nods of approval and even some smiles. The sneers and smirks that had marked my first days faded away, replaced by a growing camaraderie. The gym was no longer a battleground of judgment, but a place of mutual respect. I caught Lisa's eye, and we shared a quiet smile. Her support had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the toughest fights, allies could be found. That night, as I wrapped my hands in the quiet solitude of my apartment, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This journey was far from over, but the hardest part, breaking through the walls of doubt and prejudice, had been done. The gym had tested me in every way possible, and I had passed. I had faced the sneers, the skepticism, the relentless pressure, and come out stronger. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more fights to win, both in and out of the ring. But now, I carried with me the knowledge that respect wasn't given lightly. It was earned through persistence, courage, and heart. The jab that sent the coach flying was more than a physical strike. It was a symbol of transformation, a declaration that strength comes from within, and sometimes all it takes is one moment to change everything. The gym felt different the morning after the fight. The usual buzz was quieter, but there was a new energy underneath, a sense of possibility, of doors opening where once there had been walls. I walked in feeling lighter, more certain of my place. The coach nodded as I entered, a rare smile flickering across his face. "Ready for the next step?" he asked, no trace of the sneer that had defined him before. It was an invitation, a challenge, and an acknowledgement all in one. Other fighters greeted me with genuine respect. Conversations were warmer, encouragement more frequent. The barriers that had separated me from the group were breaking down, replaced by connections forged through shared sweat and struggle. I realized then that this wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about transformation, not just of skill or strength, but of identity and community. The simple woman who walked into the gym months ago was still me, but now I carried the confidence and pride of someone who had fought for her place and won it. Lisa and I trained together more often, pushing each other to be better, faster, stronger. We celebrated small victories and learned from every setback. The gym had become more than a place to fight. It was a place to grow. As I laced up my gloves each day, I thought about the journey, the doubts, the bruises, the moments of quiet resolve. Each step had brought me closer to this new beginning, a chapter filled with promise and potential. The coach's respect, the fighter's acceptance, the strength I found inside. They all told me one thing. This was just the start. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready. Not because I was perfect, but because I had discovered the power of persistence and heart. The jab that sent the coach flying wasn't just a moment in the ring. It was a turning point, a new beginning that showed me what I was truly capable of. Sitting quietly after class, I let the sounds of the gym wash over me. The steady thud of gloves hitting bags, the muted footsteps on the mat, the occasional shout of encouragement. It felt different now. Familiar and comforting, not intimidating or hostile. I thought back to the day I first walked through those doors. Nervous, unsure, dressed in worn clothes, an outsider in a world that seemed reserved for others. The coach's sneers, the whispered jokes, the crushing doubt, they all felt like distant echoes compared to where I am now. This journey had been about more than learning to throw a punch. It was about finding a strength I didn't know I had, about proving to myself that determination and heart could overcome judgment and fear. Each bruise, each early morning run, every drop of sweat was a testament to that truth. The jab that sent the coach flying, it was more than a physical strike. It was a declaration of belonging, a breaking of barriers, and a symbol of transformation. I wasn't just fighting in a ring. I was fighting for respect, for acceptance, for myself. The respect I earned wasn't handed to me. It was forged in the fire of persistence, shaped by every moment I chose to keep going despite the odds. That was the real victory. Looking around the gym now, I see faces I once feared and now consider allies. The coach's sharp critiques have softened into guidance. The laughter that once echoed at my expense has turned into cheers of support. I've learned that strength isn't about looking the part or fitting a mold. It's about showing up, standing tall, and refusing to give up. As I lace my gloves for the next round, I carry all of that with me. The doubts, the struggles, the triumphs. They are part of my story now. And whatever comes next, I know I'm ready. Because this fight isn't just about boxing. It's about life, resilience, and the courage to believe in yourself when no one else does.